Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Allow me 2 words about South Pole, because maybe not everybody knows the company. It's an 18-year-old company. We do 2 things. Half of the firm is a climate advisory firm, working with 1,000 clients around the world on everything from understanding your carbon footprint to decarbonizing your scope 3 emissions. And the other half of the firm is the market leader in the global carbon market and broader environmental certificates business. So we develop projects, trade them, have about 600 projects in our portfolio. And so long-winded way of introducing, it's been obviously a very turbulent time. I think it's a turbulent time in the market and in the sustainability movement more broadly. But we have strong conviction that actually the next 5 to 10 years will be some of the most exciting years that we will have. And so my job in the first year was really to prepare the company for that next phase of growth. I feel very privileged. I took over from the founders as a new CEO. That's always a challenging but very privileged position as the first, let's call it, professional manager to come in. And that, I think, was a great opportunity to sort of set the platform for what we think will be a really exciting period ahead.
Sounds very exciting. And I'm also a bit curious to know you a bit on a personal level. Let's say that you have a full week. You can do anything in the world. What do you want to do then?
So I have to say I don't remember these days because I have 2 2-year-old twins.
Wow.
2 boys that have an incredible amount of energy. But the last time my wife and I actually got away from the boys, and the coincidence is great, we actually came to Sweden. We went to Gothenburg to see Coldplay last year, which was excellent. And I remember having probably one of the best lunches that we had for a very long time in the little harbor in Gothenburg. So Sweden definitely is the place to be when you have 2 days off and the grandparents take over the boys.
Beautiful. You're welcome back at any time. And I leave the stage to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much. As I said, it's a huge privilege to be here. I think Scandinavia always plays such an important role in sustainability because you're one of the people that have been leading, but also have been true to the cause for a very long time. And so it's a huge privilege to be back and to be speaking to you. But ladies and gentlemen, let me take you back a little bit. In 1892, the international community organized an urgent conference to discuss the horse manure crisis. Horse poo crisis. A leading research institute at the time predicted that New York and London would be covered in 6 to 9 feet of horse manure within 30 years. And that was clearly a huge crisis. Today, we know, of course, what happened. Henry Ford brought the automobile to the masses. And the technology revolution really enabled a change. And what happened to all the owners of horse stables and horse manure removal companies? They all went out of business. And in our current language, we would call them stranded assets. So why is this so important? I think we are again at a tipping point. And actually we're at 2 tipping points. And I think it's really important to talk about these 2 tipping points. One tipping point is the climate crisis. And we're perfectly aware that I think we're at that most critical point. Last year again was the hottest year on record. We reached a 1.5 degree mark a few years earlier than scientists expected. We clearly see the decarbonization being off track. We see extreme weather events, storms, wildfires, floods, droughts, and we start to see irreversible damage in the system. We also realize that at the moment, this costs about 100 billion every year in damages. The insurance industry, the broader financial services sector, but the real economy is starting to pick up these damages. And some activities, some properties, some areas are no longer insurable. And I think that's where you start to see the real hit of climate. And with that, I think we all know that we now reached a point where the current carbon budget to keep us well below the 2 degrees, so the mark that was set at the Paris Agreement, will run out in 5 to 7 years. So let's call it the negative tipping point, the crisis tipping point. But we also, I think, see a number of really positive tipping points. And that brings me back to my horse manure example. 2024 was the record year for clean energy deployment. 80% of new energy deployment last year was clean. 1 in 5 cars being sold are now electric. And 2 weeks ago, China shocked the world by announcing that they now have a battery that can charge in 5 minutes. A true game changer for some of the hesitations. Every year, the grid battery storage is tripling. And from my world, I spent a decade at McKinsey and then a decade at HSBC, where I was leading sustainability and sustainable finance. The financial services sector has now started to mobilize real amounts of money. A decade ago, it was $500 billion a year. We've now surpassed the $2 trillion mark a year. That is not enough yet. We need to get to 4 to 5 a year. But within a decade, moving from $500 billion to over $2 trillion is real sign of progress. And it gives me great encouragement that actually that positive tipping point is the one that will change the narrative. And the crisis that we saw in 1892 and the crisis that we see in 2025 is one that can be overcome by real action. Most of you in this room lead sustainability teams in large businesses. And obviously for all of you, this means you have to be prepared for both outcomes. When I was at HSBC, the Bank of England, our regulator, asked us to run stress tests. And they gave us 3 different scenarios, very, very different scenarios. One was a hothouse scenario. Terrible world, quite easy to model. You essentially have extreme weather events accelerating. The other extreme was an orderly transition. We deliver the Paris Agreement. We have limited physical risk. We have limited transition risk. And there was one middle scenario, which I think becomes increasingly likely now, which was called a late policy response. I think a late policy response means we're going through the 2020s, not delivering on our climate action. We hit 2029, coincidentally a year when the president in the US will change. And we see radical policy responses because the world is truly off track. And that is, in some cases, the worst scenario because you have very significant transition risk and stranded assets. Because very quickly we move from an old technology to a new technology, but you have already baked in a very large part of the physical risk through temperature rises. And so we need to be prepared. And instead of waiting, and I think in line with sort of the direction from the speaker from Deloitte, there are things we can do today that will help prepare us for this world as a society, but more importantly, obviously, as individual businesses. And the first one is understand your climate risk. I know many of you have done the work, but you need to think in scenarios, broad scenarios, and bringing it down to individual locations, especially when it comes to physical risk. The second one is you need to have your climate transition plan ready because these tipping points come much faster than we all expect. When you look at the renewable energy deployment in the world, it is beating analyst forecasts every year, both on volume deployed and on price point. And we will see the same in many, many other sectors. And so tipping points are unpredictable, and therefore having a climate transition plan ready is essential. The third one that we do with a lot of our clients is obviously now move focus to scope 3. Many of you in the room have done the work on scope 1, on scope 2. I'm not saying it's the easy bit, but it's the easier bit. And the big focus now for all the clients that we work with is how do we get into the decarbonization of our supply chain, both with providing them access to renewable energy certificates, but also through capacity building and true decarbonization of the operations. The fourth topic, and I know it's controversial, but I think I'm convinced, and I think science increasingly is convinced, that you need to create negative emissions capacity, removal capacity. The more we are off track on our decarbonization pathway, the more we need to fund projects that create that removal capacity, that negative emissions capacity. And I think it's important to draw back to the facts. I know there is a fear that if you allow credits into the system that people will not decarbonize, but the data shows that that's not the case. MSCI has done the most comprehensive study, and they show that companies that engage in the carbon market are decarbonizing at a pace twice as fast as the average market. And so data doesn't back up the fact that it's a get out of jail card, but it is actually an important part of the package to create that insurance policy at the end. And we're really pleased. We also worked recently with the Swedish government of procuring one of the first Article 6 transactions in the world, because governments obviously are arriving at the same conclusion. Decarbonization pathways are challenging. There are risks. We need to create negative emissions capacity through investing in climate projects. And then the fifth one, and I think it's not discussed enough, we need to buy ourselves time. And one of the most effective ways of buying time is to address methane. Methane is very, very potent, but lives very short in the atmosphere. And so I think there's a lot of signs out there that now say if we actually accelerate our work on methane, we could lower temperatures in the atmosphere by 0.4 degrees, which is a very, very important building block in our pathway through the next few decades, especially as we are clearly facing a number of global challenges. We need to do the things that work quickly. So I'm convinced that technological progress will not stop. It will only accelerate. The question is it fast enough to help us on our path that we're currently obviously not on track? And I think it's really important that the people in this room have a really, really important, you all have a really important role to play to connect sustainability with the long-term competitiveness of your business models. I think that discussion is often forgotten, and I think what also the speaker from Deloitte said is really, really important. Having the chance to move away a little bit from very short-term reporting obligations is a great opportunity to refocus on the long-term business drivers of every business here, to evidence the case that long-term competitiveness, that being prepared for these tipping points, negative and positive tipping points, is a core part of the role of every sustainability leader. You didn't come into this role to do reporting. You came into this role to lead the transformation of a business, and I think now is a great opportunity. And I'm absolutely convinced that we have all the tools. I want to end just very briefly addressing the slightly more complex political environment. And I was at a conference hosted by Mia Mottley the other day. She's the Prime Minister of Barbados and also the leader of the Vulnerable Nations Council. And she had a very pragmatic view. Barbados is an ex-British colony, is a cricket nation, and her narrative was, you have to play the pitch as it is, not as you would like it to be. And for me that resonated, right? We can sit around and debate politics and debate what we read every day in the news, but in the end we know the next decade will have a certain shape, and there may be slightly different pathways, but the medium-term outlook is the same. You have to play the pitch as it is, not as you want it to be. And it really means that I think a group of leaders has to come together and give each other confidence and give your colleagues confidence that staying on this course is really important. We are here to support. We're here to support both on the advisory side, and have fantastic colleagues in the room, and also on the access to energy attributes and obviously the broader discussion about the carbon market, which we're very, very happy to have. We represent about 15 to 20% of the market, which in our view is a absolutely essential market to move us towards net zero. And we're outside to have the discussion. I'm very, very pleased to be here. As I said before, the Nordics for me have always been the shining light. People in uncertain times look at the original leaders of sustainability. It has always been the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries. I think it's your moment again to shine and show that this can be done despite all the backlash and all the difficulty. So thank you again for having me, and I'm looking forward to a debate today. Thank you.